Motors is admitting it turned a blind eye to a potentially deadly car defect for more than a decade. This year, the automaker has recalled millions of cars because of the problem that may have killed at least 13 people. As BC Analyst reports, an internal GM investigation found a culture where no one in the company took responsibility.
A pattern of incompetence and neglect. That's how General Motors CEO Mary Barra describes the results of an internal investigation into its faulty ignition switch defect. The report, conducted by outside attorney Anton Valukas, involved more than 350 interviews and 41 million documents. It concludes there's no evidence GM conspired to cover up the facts. However, there was a history of misjudgments, a broken workplace culture riddled with failures. As a result, the automaker has fired 15 employees. 5 others have been disciplined.
As I read the report, I was deeply saddened and disturbed.
Some of the troubling conclusions reveal that some in the company knew as early as 2001 that ignition switches in Chevy Cobalt, Saturn Ions, and other small cars had the potential to suddenly shut off and disable airbags, power steering, and other features. It took GM over a decade to issue a recall. So far, 13 deaths and multiple accidents have been linked to the defect. Barra, who claims she and other top executives weren't made aware of the problem until December of last year, says the company will compensate crash victims and their families.
I am guided by 2 clear principles. First, we will do the right thing for those who were harmed. And second, we'll accept responsibility for our mistakes and commit to doing everything within our power to make sure this never happens again.
During her 20-minute address, Barra stressed the Detroit automaker's renewed commitment to safety. GM recently hired a safety chief and implemented new protocol. Mark Phelan is a business writer for the Detroit Free Press.
The organization is shaken by what happened, but it appears that they're taking all the right steps.
Last month, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration fined GM $35 million for failing to act sooner. But GM's troubles may not end there. Congress and the U.S. Justice Department have launched investigations of their own. BC Analyst, Al Jazeera, Detroit.
Joining us to discuss the results of the GM recall report is automotive analyst Lauren Fick. She's in Indianapolis this morning. Thank you for joining us. While Mary Barra fired 15 employees in the wake of this scandal, the report she commissioned absolved her and her top lieutenants, and it found no evidence of any cover-up. Will that come back to bite GM?
Well, that'll be interesting because once the government gets their hands on this 325-page report, Mary Barra is going to have to go in front of Congress again in August. And I'm sure they're going to have questions. And if they feel that she is personally at fault, which would be very difficult to prove, then she, of course, will obviously get whatever comes to her. But you have to remember that part of the GM culture at the time was not to take notes on attendance of who came to these engineering meetings and what the decisions were. They had what they called the GM nod. So part of that report was if we all sat in a meeting and we found that there was something wrong, we'd nod, we'd all agree, and then nothing would get done. So it'd be very difficult to actually post it on somebody specifically.
Say, Lauren, how dirty are the hands of former CEO Dan Akerson in all of this?
Well, the thing is, they had what was silos, and they would have like sales and marketing would report directly to the CEO because it was about sales, it was about money and exposure. On the engineering side, there were 4 levels that had to go from the engineering team before it got to the CEO. So they could have easily insulated him, and he may not have had a clue. However, people in the engineering and safety department did have a clue, and the fact that they said they didn't realize that the ignition switch was connected to the airbag when they're the ones that designed for the safety of their vehicles when a car was parked. If it was hit, an airbag would not deploy. So if the ignition switch was in the off position, obviously the airbag's not going to deploy if there's an impact, and they said they didn't realize there was a connection. That's kind of really sad to hear.
Wow. Well, Mary Barra offered her own assurance that GM is learning from their mistake. Take a listen.
In this case, with these vehicles, we simply didn't do our job. We failed these customers, and we must face up to it, and we must learn from it.
Okay, we hear what she's saying, but reports are GM insiders were calling these ignition switches the switches from hell as far back as 2002. How can car buyers trust GM not to be as cavalier and careless with their lives going forward?
Well, there has been a lot of changes already in the corporate culture over at General Motors. There are now 60 safety inspectors. They're completely gutting their legal department. They really are concerned. They have put out some really top quality cars. 2 of their vehicles won the North American Car and Truck of the Year. So obviously their product has improved dramatically, probably some of the best product I've seen on a General Motors in a long time. There are now 4 divisions for them to focus on rather than 8, and they have changed the corporate culture as far as communication and taking away those silos so there's cross communication. I think that's definitely going to help. If you're looking at a GM car, take one for a drive and make your own decision.
Well, CEO Barra has said she wants to compensate the families. Will those compensation efforts be enough to keep families from seeking much bigger compensation in the courts?
Well, that's going to be very interesting. They have this fund that they're putting together, and my concern is, I always tell people, if you know someone that's been in one of these accidents, whether there was an unfortunate tragedy or a serious injury, you have to read all the small print, because with the big print says we're going to give you X amount of dollars, an attorney needs to read that over, because the small print may say, we'll give you money out of this fund, but you don't have any recourse down the road, especially if there's an injury that can prohibit you from working or having a good quality of life. So I'm sure with the 75 existing class action lawsuits that this will be taken into consideration. And of course, everybody wants money from the fund as well as a lawsuit. I don't think you're going to get both.
Automotive analyst Lauren Fix, thank you so much.